Hi, so today we're going to look at how to write an essay. We're going to address the essay, explore the way in which Keats uses setting in the Eve of St Agnes, and one other poem you have studied. You must refer to context in your answer. Now, we've already had a video on the Eve of St Agnes, and the other poem I'm going to choose to use in this essay is La Belle Dame sans Merci. We've also had a video on that poem, so you might well wish to look back at those two videos before you embark on this essay writing task with me. So really, I'm going to focus on setting and also bring in some contextual knowledge about setting. And the three pieces of contextual knowledge I'm going to try and show you how you might use are all associated with the Gothic genre. So one element of this is a medieval setting. The second element of this is a setting which involves sinister events and buildings and architecture. The third element is the notion of decay and imagery surrounding decay. And the last element is the setting of nature and what's happening in the natural world that enhances our understanding of the characters in these poems. So first of all, just to remind you, the Eve of St Agnes is the poem in which Madeline is in her chamber, and she is on the Eve of St Agnes, following a superstitious routine in order to try and catch a vision of her lover. And Porphyro is racing towards her and is determined to make himself a real version of this vision. La Belle Dame sans Merci is the poem where we find the knight-at-arms languishing on the cold hillside. And he has been lulled into a fairy's elfin grot, and he is not the man he used to be. He is anguished and pale and loitering on the cold hillside. He has this encounter with the supernatural that does not leave him better off. So first of all, we should think about the medieval settings here. In the Eve of St Agnes, we have references to cavaliers and to knights who are enjoying a medieval banquet, a rich party. There are references to tapestries and the richness of the music. And this is clearly a medieval castle where a lady is shuttered away, and Porphyro, her knight in shining armour, although he isn't one of the knights invited to the banquet, is coming to rescue her and take her away. In the Belle Dame sans Merci, it is the woman who has the control. She takes the knight into her spell. And she creates a dream for him to show him a glimpse of what has happened to the kings and princes that have messed with her before. And he becomes part of this dream. So the medieval context and the dreamlike states are something that both of these poems have in common. This, in La Belle Dame sans Merci, the maiden is not in distress, it is the knight-at-arms who is in distress. We should note also that with La Belle Dame sans Merci, we have the ballad form, which is a traditional medieval form. And the Romantic poets were quite interested in revisiting medieval forms. So here we have Keats reviving this medieval form for his own purpose. Another aspect of the Gothic that we would want to explore in this essay referring to setting is the setting of sinister landscapes, architecture, buildings. In the Eve of St Agnes, we open with a cold chapel and the effigies on tombstones. Porphyro has to go through lowly arched ways, and his helmet brushes cobwebs. He walks through many a dusky gallery, and Indeed, Madeline's taper, when she goes into her own chamber, is snuffed out mysteriously. The light goes out. So there's a lot of darkness, there's a lot of shady passages, and this is something that we find in many Gothic novels, an aging building where it's necessary to negotiate and navigate many spooky passages. In La Belle Dame sans Merci, the landscape and the Gothic setting is a natural one instead of a man-made one. But similarly, we do have the coldness of the hillside. It is a lonely place. There are no other people. And we have the trappings of a sinister setting with the knight-at-arms being lured to an elfin grot. So it's a more supernatural setting, it's otherworldly. There is more attention paid to the magic here, with the roots of relish that the fairy's child uses to woo the knight-at-arms with, but it's similar in that he has to go on a journey. He took her on his pacing steed to the elfin grot. He has to go on a journey in order to reach the woman, and the journey is peppered with these various magical ingredients. So there are slightly different ways in which this sinister aspect of the landscape and the architecture are explored, but they both contribute to the building up of tension. Both characters, the knight and Porphyro, are trying to get to a destination which is with the woman. Another aspect very often used in Gothic literature is imagery associated with decay, and this can be physical decay or some sort of emotional or moral decay. Now we have Angela, Madeline's maid in the Eve of St Agnes, who decays and is a decaying, aged, decrepit woman. She's described as an aged crone, she's palsied, and she died palsied, twitched, with meagre face deform. She is crumbling, and we could say that she has also decayed morally by allowing Porphyro to come in and have access to Madeline, whom she is supposed to be protecting. She is supposed to be guarding Madeline from moral harm. So she is decayed in that way, just as she has decayed physically. And it is the young in this poem who have the energy and who have the control. In La Belle Dame sans Merci, we also get that the knight is decaying physically and morally as well. He has been lured by this wicked woman. He is now pale. There is a lily on his brow. The rose fast withereth, the fading rose. He is surrounded by a kind of sickness. He's anguished, and he has a fever. There is a dew of fever on his forehead. And these are all images that Keats would have been familiar with in his role as surgeon. He was a surgeon in the hospital. He was a qualified surgeon. He was familiar with death and dying, but he was also familiar with this on a more personal note, in that he nursed his brother, and his mother died from TB. And he was familiar with the symptoms of TB, and indeed he himself died of TB after a short space of time. So he was familiar with illness and sickness, and here it looks like he is using the imagery of sickness and paleness to make a comment also on the knight-at-arms and his moral and emotional well-being. And the knight does have a feverish dream where he sees images of kings and princes who have endured similar decay. They are like phantoms. death pale were they all, these princes and warriors. So there is in these two poems a presence of decay and dying that one would expect in Gothic literature. The last element of setting that I'd like to talk about today is to do with nature. Nature in the Eve of St Agnes is used at the beginning of the poem to show coldness, to show that something is not right with nature. The hare limps, the owl is cold, we have the sheep are silent. Nature is not flourishing. Similarly, in La Belle Sans Merci, the sedge has withered, no birds sing, and the knight-at-arms languishes on the cold hillside. So we have the notion that the natural world is not at ease, that something is amiss, and that this is reflecting perhaps the tension in the development of the story. There is going to be disruption to the order of things. And indeed, the fairy's child turns out to be not a good match for the knight. And Porphyro and Madeline escape in the middle of the night, and they turn away from the conventions of the medieval world, the conventions of arranged marriages, etc., and take a risk themselves. A risk which we can see is a battle against the elements. They go out onto into the wild elements. There is a storm. The storm has been present in the poem earlier on, with it battering on the windows, and now they go into the storm and they take a risk by embracing nature. And this is a very romantic notion, that if you embrace nature, you will be inspired, you will be energized, and that nature can be beautiful in its power and its wildness, as well as its gentleness. So a very, very romantic ending for our two lovers. So I just want to give you now an example of how you might write a paragraph to answer this question. A reminder of the title: explore the way in which Keats uses setting in the Eve of St Agnes and one other poem. You must refer to context in your answer. Typically for Gothic literature, nature is used to create a sinister atmosphere. The sedge has withered and no birds sing. The night also languishes on the cold hillside. This can be related to a similar presentation of nature in Keats's longer poem, The Eve of St Agnes, where the hare limps and the sheep are silent. Both poems establish a sense of foreboding by their reference to nature being disturbed.